Between quiet shelves, someone meets a violent end. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy hearing from you. Let's step inside. If you want to get Nero Wolfe's attention, there are 3 reliable methods: threaten his orchids, tamper with his food, or disrupt the brownstone's routines in a way that smells of deliberate disrespect. The 4th, money, works only when it arrives, dressed as an intellectual insult. On that particular Tuesday, it came disguised as a book. It was 10 minutes past 11, which put us safely between breakfast and lunch, with Wolfe ensconced in his red leather chair, like a well-fed Buddha contemplating the universe and finding it wanting. I was at my desk, pretending to review expense receipts while actually working on a crossword puzzle that had already beaten me twice. Fritz was in the kitchen, and the house was enjoying one of its rare moments of equilibrium. Then the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock. "That'll be someone who doesn't know any better," I said. Wolfe didn't move. He never did. His eyes, half-lidded, remained fixed on nothing in particular, an old trick of his that suggested he was thinking about everything at once. I sighed, got up, and went to answer the door. The man standing there was a librarian's idea of a nervous breakdown. Mid-40s, neat but rumpled, spectacles sliding down a long nose, and hands clutching a leather satchel like it contained either state secrets or a bomb. His eyes darted past me into the hall, as if expecting to be shot on sight. "I'm looking for Mr. Wolfe," he said in a voice that had been sanded thin by worry. "You found the address," I told him. "That's the hard part. I'm Archie Goodwin. Come in before you sprain something." He stepped inside like the floor might give way, and I took his coat. The satchel, however, stayed glued to his side. "I have an appointment," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "With who?" "With Mr. Wolfe." "That's encouraging. Did he know about it?" He hesitated. That told me enough. I ushered him into the office anyway. Wolfe regarded him for a full 5 seconds, long enough to inventory his flaws, habits, and possible crimes, before speaking. "Your name," Wolfe said, "your business, and your reason for entering my house without proper arrangement, in that order." The man swallowed. "My name is Daniel Harrow. I'm the chief archivist at the Huxley Institute Library, and I'm here because something has gone wrong." Wolfe grunted. "That is rarely sufficient." Harrow clutched the satchel tighter. "I believe," he said carefully, "that a book has been murdered." I blinked. Wolfe's eyebrows rose exactly 1 millimeter, a tectonic shift in his emotional landscape. "Explain," Wolfe said. Harrow opened the satchel and withdrew a book. Not just any book, but the kind that makes librarians go misty-eyed, old, leather-bound, edges yellowed with age, the spine stamped in faded gold. He placed it on Wolfe's desk with reverence. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. That alone was worth the price of admission. "This," Harrow said, "is a first edition of De Re Strategia, printed in Venice in 1589. It vanished from our restricted collection 6 weeks ago. Last night, it was returned." "Returned," Wolfe repeated. "Voluntarily?" Harrow shook his head. "It was placed on my desk. No note, no explanation, but it's not the same book." I leaned in. "Looks like a book to me." "That's because you don't know what it used to be," Harrow said. His hands trembled now. "Several pages have been replaced. The marginalia, handwritten notes by a 17th-century political theorist, are gone. The binding has been altered. Someone has edited it." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "You are saying the book has been falsified?" "Yes." "And you believe this is a crime?" "I believe," Harrow said, "it is an intellectual murder." I waited for Wolfe to wave him out. Wolfe hated melodrama almost as much as he hated being interrupted. But instead, he did something alarming. He smiled. "Mr. Harrow," Wolfe said, You have come to me because you suspect a deliberate act of substitution. You believe that the alterations were not clumsy, but precise. Yes, and that the person responsible had access, motive, and sufficient erudition to understand the value of what was destroyed. Yes. Wolfe leaned back. Continue. Harrow exhaled, relief flooding his features. The book's disappearance caused internal conflict at the Institute. 4 people had access to the vault. Each had reasons, professional, personal, ideological, for wanting control of the original annotations. The return of the book was meant to silence the issue. Instead, it has made it worse. I cleared my throat. Let me guess. You went to the police? Yes. They told me no laws were broken. Welcome to the philosophical wing of law enforcement, I said. Wolfe ignored me. Why come here? Harrow hesitated again. Because whoever did this knew the sanctity of archives. They violated it deliberately, and because, he added softly, I believe the next step will not be confined to paper. That got my attention. Wolfe studied him. You fear escalation? Yes. Wolfe's fingers steepled. And yet you bring the corrupted artifact into my house. I didn't know where else to go. Wolfe's gaze dropped to the book, then lifted to Harrow's face. You have committed an impertinence. You have introduced disorder into my environment. Harrow paled. However, Wolfe continued, you have also presented a problem of intellectual dishonesty, strategic deception, and calculated audacity. These are matters that offend me. He paused. I will consider your proposal. Harrow sagged with relief. Thank you. I did not say I would accept it, Wolfe said. You will leave the book here. Mr. Goodwin will make inquiries. You will answer questions when summoned, and you will refrain from attempting to correct the situation yourself. Yes, of course. I escorted him out, noting the way his eyes lingered on the door, as if he already regretted opening it. When I returned, Wolfe was staring at the book like it had insulted his mother. You're taking this? I asked. For now, Wolfe said. Because someone believed they could rewrite truth and suffer no consequence. He sniffed. And because they were arrogant enough to think the substitution would suffice. I grinned. So what do we call it? Wolfe considered. A death in the library. Catchy, I said. I'll get my hat. The brown stone, I reflected as I headed for the door, had just been disturbed, and Nero Wolfe never forgave that. I got my hat off the stand in the front hall and came back through the office doorway with the practiced air of a man heading out to fetch milk, not to poke a stick into an academic hornet's nest. Wolfe hadn't moved. The book lay on his desk as if it had always belonged there, and he was regarding it with the expression he reserved for 2 things: bad cooking and bad reasoning. You're staring at it like it's going to confess, I said. It already has, Wolfe replied. It has confessed to being altered. The question is not whether, but why, and by whom. That's what I'm for, I told him. Feet, eyes, ears, and a polite smile for the people who don't deserve one. Where's this Huxley Institute Library? Uptown. 42nd Street, Wolfe said. I stopped. Midtown. That means traffic, noise, and lunch that tastes like regret. You will endure, Wolfe said. Do I have to take the book with me? No. Wolfe's tone made it a decree. It remains here. It has intruded. It will be detained. I circled his desk and looked down at the volume. Up close, it had the particular smell of old leather and old lies. Somebody had handled it recently. There was a faint, glossy sheen where fingers had worried at the spine, and the edge of the front cover showed a nick that wasn't the kind that time produces. Time is patient. This nick was impatient. You want me to look at their vault, I said. Interview their 4 suspects. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Harrow said 4 had access. It does not follow that only 4 are implicated. Sure, I said. There's always a 5th, The person who makes the coffee. Wolfe's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Take Saul Panzer's number with you. That made me pause again. Wolfe doesn't hand me Saul's number the way some men hand out umbrellas. Saul was for when the weather turned, and from Wolfe's tone the sky was already black. You expect trouble? I asked. I expect strategy, Wolfe said. The book is titled De Re Strategia. The irony is not accidental. Someone is playing a game. We will not permit them to choose all the rules. I nodded. Any specific instructions besides be clever and don't get killed? Wolfe looked at me as if I'd asked whether he wanted salt. Observe. Listen. When you speak, do not overdo it. That last one hurts, I said, and went to the hall. In the kitchen, Fritz was placing a platter on the sideboard with the tenderness of a man laying out jewels. He glanced at my hat and coat. You will be away for lunch, Archie. Looks like, I said, so Wolfe's adopted a wounded book. Fritz's brows lifted in the way Europeans do when Americans say something that should be illegal. A book? Don't ask, I said. If Mr. Wolfe gets irritable, hide the nutmeg. Fritz gave me a look that suggested nutmeg was above my pay grade, and I left before he could say something in that calm voice of his that makes you feel guilty about breathing. The ride to 42nd Street was the usual Manhattan sermon on impatience. I got there with my collar slightly damp and my mood only mildly homicidal. The Huxley Institute occupied a stone building that tried to look like Oxford but couldn't quite shake New York's accent. Inside, the lobby smelled of disinfectant and ambition. A young woman at the desk looked me over like I was a misplaced delivery. Can I help you? Daniel Harrow, I said. Tell him Archie Goodwin is here. Her eyes flicked to my suit, then back to my face. Do you have an appointment? I have charm, I said, and I'm punctual to within the limits of traffic. She didn't smile, but she picked up the phone. A minute later, a security man appeared and escorted me past a set of doors that required keys, codes, and an attitude. The library proper was quiet in the way only money can buy. It wasn't the public sort with children and paperback romances. This was a cathedral of scholarship, long tables, green lamps, shelves that went up like cliffs. People bent over books the way gamblers bend over cards. Harrow met me at the end of a corridor and looked as if he hadn't slept since he left Wolfe's house. Mr. Goodwin, thank you for coming. Don't thank me, I said. It encourages me. Show me where the crime happened. He flinched at the word crime, then led me down another corridor to a door with a heavy lock. He produced keys from a ring that looked like it belonged to a medieval jailer and opened it. Inside was the vault room. Not a bank vault with steel and drama, but close. Reinforced cabinets, temperature controls, and the kind of lighting that makes you feel like you should whisper even when you're alone. Harrow pointed to a cabinet with a glass front. That's where De Re Strategia was kept. Was, I said. So 6 weeks ago, it walks away. Any sign of forced entry? No, nothing. The cabinet was locked. The vault door was locked. The security logs showed no breach. That's why the Institute tried to handle it internally. Which means, I said, someone with access took it, or someone without access made sure the logs looked clean. Harrow's lips tightened. That's what frightens me. Who else had access? I asked. He hesitated, then said, Professor Lydia Quill. She oversees the Institute's rare collections. Dr. Martin Sloan, our acquisitions director. Celeste Vaughn, our donor liaison. She controls the benefactors, which means she controls us. And Jonah Rusk, the restoration specialist. I filed the names away. Quill, Sloan, Vaughn, Rusk. Each one sounded like they came with their own prepackaged motive. And you, I said. Yes, Harrow admitted. Of course me. Good, I said. Honesty is cheaper than lawyers. Now, when the book came back last night, where was it placed? On my desk, he said. In my office. I found it when I came in this morning. Your office has locks? 2. And a security cameras in the corridor. And the camera caught? Harrow's throat bobbed. Nothing. It stopped recording for 17 minutes, sometime after midnight. There it was. The first clean little slice of calculation. No brute force, no smashed doors, just a neat surgical absence. I smiled, because sometimes my face does that when the game gets interesting. 17 minutes, I said. That's long enough to return a book and short enough to brag. Harrow stared at me. Who knew you were the one most likely to find it? I asked. Anyone, he said, and then, reluctantly, everyone. I open the archives every morning. Fine, I said. Let's go meet your 4 saints and sinners. Start with Professor Quill. I want to see the face of a woman who can oversee rare books and still sleep at night. Harrow led me up one flight and down a corridor that smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. Professor Lydia Quill's office door was open, which I took as either confidence or carelessness. Inside, the room was arranged with the severe tidiness of a mind that liked categories. Bookshelves marched in formation along the walls. A single orchid, white, impeccable, sat on the windowsill. That alone made me wary. Professor Quill herself rose from behind her desk when we entered. She was in her early 50s, tall, spare, and composed, with iron-gray hair pulled back tight enough to discourage loose thinking. Her eyes flicked to Harrow, then settled on me with cool appraisal. "Mr. Harrow," she said, "you look exhausted." "I am," he replied. "This is Archie Goodwin." Her eyebrow lifted a fraction. "I didn't realize we were expanding the investigation." "We're outsourcing," I said. "Private sector, less paperwork." She didn't smile. "I assume this concerns the book." "That's a safe assumption," I said. "I hear you had access to it." "I oversee the rare collections," she said evenly. "Access is my responsibility." 6 weeks ago, I said, someone with access removed De Re Strategia without leaving so much as a fingerprint on the logs. Any thoughts? "Yes," she said at once, "that our security protocols are inadequate." "That's a policy answer," I said. "I was hoping for a human one." Her gaze sharpened. "Are you suggesting I took it?" "I'm suggesting you could have," I said. "Big difference." She folded her hands. "Then allow me to clarify. I had no reason to steal it, alter it, or return it like a taunt. The annotations were academically interesting, but hardly unique. Their value was contextual, not proprietary." "That's funny," I said, "because someone went to a lot of trouble to erase them." Her jaw tightened, just a hair. "That troubles me as much as it does you." "Does it?" I asked. "Or does it trouble you that someone else now controls the narrative of a book under your care?" That landed. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. "The Institute has been under pressure. Donors want results, publications, prestige. There has been debate about priorities." "Let me guess," I said. Someone thought the annotations supported a theory they wanted to sell. She looked at Harrow, then back at me. "Dr. Sloan believes historical materials should serve contemporary strategy studies. He has ambitions." "Academic ambition?" I said. "The cleanest motive on the market." She stiffened. "I'm not accusing him." "Good," I said. "That's my job." I thanked her and left before the conversation could congeal into mutual resentment. In the corridor, Harrow whispered, "She's formidable." "She's careful," I said. Different thing. We found Dr. Martin Sloan 2 doors down in a glass-walled office that looked more like a startup than a library. He was younger than I expected, late 30s, with an earnest face and a tie that had never known regret. He greeted us with enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. "Archie Goodwin," he said, pumping my hand. "I've heard of Nero Wolfe." "People usually have," I said. Let's talk about books. His smile dimmed slightly. I assume you mean that book. I do, I said. You've written about strategic doctrine. The annotations that disappeared. Useful? Intriguing, he said. They hinted at a transitional theory of power, but I didn't need to steal a book to access ideas. I could have requested access. You could, I agreed, but requesting access leaves a trail. His eyes flicked to the glass wall, then back. I was out of the country when it disappeared. Convenient, I said. Any proof? Yes. Conferences. Flights. Good, I said. That narrows it to the times you weren't away. He bristled. This is absurd. Only if the truth is, I said. Celeste Varn turned out to be all silk and steel. She met us in a lounge decorated to make donors feel important and absolved. She listened, nodded, and said nothing incriminating until I asked who stood to gain from controlling the Institute's intellectual assets. Control, she said lightly, is always about timing. And returning the book? I asked. Why do that? She smiled then. To show restraint or superiority. That left Jonah Rusk. We found him in the restoration room, hunched over a work table, hands steady, eyes bloodshot. He looked up as we entered, and for the first time that day, I felt a ripple of unease. Mr. Rusk, I said, you fix old books. I preserve them, he said sharply. Someone replaced pages, I said. Cleanly, professionally. He stared at me. Only a vandal would call that preservation. But only a specialist could do it, I said. 17 minutes worth. His hands stilled. That was enough for me. I left with Harrow, my head full of angles and absences. Back at the brownstone that evening, Wolfe listened without interruption as I laid it out. When I finished, he opened his eyes, fully. The book was not murdered, he said. It was dissected, and the one who returned it wished to be seen. He tapped the desk. Tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we shall invite them to my house. I grinned. All of them? Of course, Wolfe said. They have already disturbed it. Now they will explain why. The invitations went out before dinner, which told me Wolfe was already annoyed. He dictated them with icy politeness, specifying time, place, and the expectation of cooperation, and I delivered them by phone with my most reassuring voice, the one that sounds friendly while promising inconvenience. They began arriving the next afternoon, one by one, each carrying their own version of innocence like an umbrella on a cloudy day. Professor Quill arrived first, precisely on time, coat immaculate, eyes already cataloguing the office as if it were a hostile archive. She took the chair I indicated and folded her hands, spine straight, waiting. Dr. Sloane followed 5 minutes later, flushed and indignant, his charm dialed up a notch too high. Celeste Varn made an entrance that suggested she was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves for her benefit, and Jonah Rusk came last, 10 minutes late, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, smelling faintly of solvent and sleeplessness. Daniel Harrow hovered near the door, unsure whether he belonged among suspects or furniture. Wolfe had not yet emerged from the elevator. That was deliberate. He liked to let the atmosphere ripen. I poured water, offered chairs, and watched. Sloane avoided Rusk's gaze. Quill studied Celeste Varn with something close to contempt. Rusk kept his hands in his pockets like they might incriminate him if released. At exactly 4 o'clock, the elevator door opened and Wolfe rolled in, majestic and unmoved, as if gravity were a personal favor. The room stilled. Even Celeste's smile recalibrated. "Be seated," Wolfe said, though no one had stood. He took his chair behind the desk and regarded them all in turn. "You are here because a valuable object was removed, altered, and returned in a manner both insulting and strategic. I detest strategy when it is inept." Dr. Sloane bristled. With respect, Mr. Wolfe, no crime has been— Do not interrupt me, Wolfe said mildly. Sloane subsided. Wolfe continued. The book in question was altered with professional skill. The annotations removed were not destroyed accidentally. They were excised. That indicates motive, preparation, and an understanding of consequence. He paused, eyes moving to Rusk. Mr. Rusk, you possess the technical ability. Rusk swallowed. That doesn't mean— Silence, Wolfe said. Ability is not guilt, it is opportunity. Wolfe shifted his gaze. Dr. Sloane, you possess ambition. Professor Quill, you possess authority. Ms. Vaughn, you possess influence. Mr. Harrow, you possess access. Harrow flinched. Each of you, Wolfe said, had something to gain from controlling the content of that book. But only one of you had reason to return it. Celeste laughed lightly. Reason or nerve? Vanity, Wolfe said. The return was not an act of conscience. It was a message. I leaned against the wall and watched the message land. Quill's lips tightened. Sloane looked angry now, not defensive. Rusk looked ill. Wolfe steepled his fingers. The timing of the return is crucial. It coincided with a scheduled review of the Institute's donor agreements. Celeste's smile froze. You, Wolfe said, managed those relationships. You required proof that certain interpretations could be suppressed or revealed at will. The book was altered to remove inconvenient commentary, then returned to demonstrate control. That's absurd, Celeste said. I don't touch books. You did not, Wolfe agreed. You employed someone who did. Rusk jerked upright. I didn't. You did, Wolfe said. At her request, you believed the annotations would be copied, not destroyed. When you discovered they were removed entirely, you panicked. Rusk's face drained of color. And you returned the book, Wolfe went on, because Miss Vaughn instructed you to. A calculated gesture. Unfortunately, she misjudged my tolerance. Celeste stood. This is outrageous. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Sit down. She did. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, the library. I went to the side table and brought the book forward, opening it carefully to the altered section. Funny thing, I said. The replacement pages use a binding adhesive not stocked by the Institute, but it is stocked by a private conservation firm, one Ms. Vaughn recommends to donors. Rusk broke then. Words spilled out, messy and desperate. He hadn't meant to erase history. He'd been promised funding, security, protection. He'd believed it was temporary. Celeste said nothing. When it was done, Wolfe leaned back. You attempted to edit truth, he said to her. Truth resists. He dismissed them with a flick of his hand. Saul Panzer, waiting discreetly in the hall, took over. When the door closed and the house settled back into itself, Wolfe sighed. Dinner, he said. Intellectual vandalism is exhausting. I grinned. Another library saved. Wolfe sniffed. No, merely corrected. Appetite, Mr. Goodwin, is the final arbiter of order. Upstairs, Fritz rang the dinner bell, and the brownstone forgave us. This once. The dinner bell had barely finished echoing up the stairwell when Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face composed but his eyes carrying a question mark. Wolfe noticed at once. He always did. What is it, Fritz? Wolfe asked. The pantry, Fritz said gently. Something is not as it should be. I stopped halfway to my chair. Define not as it should be. One of the spice tins has been moved, Fritz said. Returned, yes, but not correctly. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. That was never a good sign. The brownstone could tolerate deception, arrogance, even intellectual vandalism. But domestic interference crossed a line. Which tin? Wolfe asked. Paprika, Fritz replied. Hungarian. Smoked. I whistled softly. That's a felony in at least 6 countries. Wolfe opened his eyes. No one entered the kitchen today except you, Mr. Goodwin, and myself. And Saul, I said. Mr. Panzer would not err so crudely, Wolfe said. We went to the kitchen. Fritz lifted the tin with care and held it out. Inside, beneath the top layer of spice, was a folded slip of parchment, browned with age and smelling faintly of dust and leather. I stared. Well, I'll be switched. Wolfe did not touch it. You will open that. I did. The writing was cramped, elegant, unmistakably old. Marginalia, not copied, original, the missing annotations. So they weren't destroyed, I said. They were relocated. Hidden, Wolfe corrected. In my house. Fritz looked stricken. I would never... Of course not, Wolfe said. That is precisely why this location was chosen. I read a few lines. Strategic commentary, sharp and subversive, the kind that could upend a comfortable academic thesis. Enough to explain Celeste Varn's desperation. But she was escorted out, I said. So was Rusk. Saul had eyes on them. Yes, Wolfe said. Which means the annotations were placed here earlier. My stomach tightened. During the interviews? No, before, Wolfe said, when Mr. Harrow first arrived. I thought back. The satchel, his nervous hands, the way he'd insisted on leaving the book. You're saying Harrow planted them? Temporarily, Wolfe said. He required a neutral custodian, someone incorruptible, someone terrifying. I grinned despite myself. You? Precisely, Wolfe said. Mr. Harrow feared Miss Varn's influence but lacked proof. He anticipated an attempt to suppress the annotations permanently. By hiding them here, he ensured their survival and provoked exposure. That's risky, I said. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but effective. Fritz straightened, relief evident. Then dinner? In a moment, Wolfe said. He turned to me. Telephone, Mr. Harrow. Harrow answered on the second ring, his voice tight. Wolfe put him on speaker. You concealed the annotations in my pantry, Wolfe said. A pause. Then, yes. You did not ask permission. No. You exploited my reputation. Yes. Another pause. Wolfe considered. You will retrieve them tomorrow under supervision, Wolfe said. They will be authenticated and published in full. Any attempt at interference will be met with consequences I will enjoy devising. I understand, Harrow said softly. Wolfe hung up. I looked at him. You're not angry? I am, Wolfe said. But he chose correctly. Truth is safest where appetite is respected. Fritz smiled faintly. We ate. The food was excellent, the wine cooperative. The brownstone settled back into its familiar rhythm. The day's disturbance filed away like a solved equation. Later, as I stretched out with a cigarette, I said, Funny thing. Everyone came here to control a book. Only one person trusted it to survive without control. Yes, Wolfe said, and that is why he will keep his position. I exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. Libraries, I said. Dangerous places. Wolfe closed his eyes. Only when people forget they exist to preserve, not to rewrite. Upstairs, the house was quiet again, and this time it meant it. The quiet didn't last. It never does, not when Wolfe has corrected something rather than destroyed it. Corrections have a way of generating resentment, and resentment, I've learned, is the most renewable resource in Manhattan. I was halfway through the morning mail when the front doorbell rang. 3 short jabs, impatient and familiar. I opened it to find Inspector Kramer filling the doorway. Hat tilted, face already irritated by the mere existence of the brownstone. Morning, Archie, he said. Tell the fat man I want a word. That's good morning where I come from, I said, but I let him in. Kramer stomped into the office like a man who'd been invited somewhere he resented but couldn't avoid. Wolfe watched him approach with polite disinterest. Good morning, Inspector, Wolfe said. You're early. I'm always early when somebody starts rearranging truth without a permit, Kramer growled. You've been busy. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. Busy is an imprecise term. Kramer slapped a folded paper onto Wolfe's desk. Celeste Vaughn's attorney filed a complaint last night. Claims coercion, unlawful detention, reputational harm, the works. Ah, Wolfe said. She is adapting. She's also talking, Kramer said, about donor pressure, academic manipulation, private restorers, and a certain rare book that seems to move around on its own. I leaned back. Books get restless. Kramer shot me a look, then focused on Wolfe. You got anything I need to know before this turns into a circus? Wolfe nodded once. Mr. Harrow will deliver original annotations today. They will be authenticated publicly. Ms. Vaughn's position will become untenable. The Institute will survive, chastened. And the law? Kramer asked. Wolfe spread his hands. No theft was intended permanently. No destruction occurred. Mr. Rusk will testify to inducement. Ms. Vaughn's influence, not her actions, was criminal. Kramer grimaced. That's thin. Truth often is, Wolfe said. But it cuts. Kramer sighed. I don't like being brought in after the fact. I prefer you afterward, Wolfe said. You are less disruptive. Kramer snorted, but there was a flicker of reluctant amusement. You're impossible. Yes, Wolfe agreed. After Kramer left, the house exhaled again. Fritz appeared with coffee, setting the tray down with ceremonial care. There will be visitors today, he said. You have a gift, I told him. At 11 sharp, Daniel Harrow arrived, carrying a slim archival case as if it contained something alive. He looked calmer than before, though there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much either. Wolfe did not invite him to sit. You will open it, Wolfe said. Harrow did. Inside were the annotations. Preserved, catalogued, each page sleeved and labeled. Wolfe examined them without touching, eyes moving with measured satisfaction. You succeeded, Wolfe said. I took a risk, Harrow replied. I trusted that if anyone could force the truth into daylight without altering it, it would be you. Wolfe inclined his head a fraction. Flattery is unnecessary, but accurate. Harrow hesitated. There may be consequences. There always are, Wolfe said. You have chosen the correct ones. Harrow left lighter than he'd come. By mid-afternoon, the phone began to ring. Academics, journalists, administrators. Wolfe ignored them all. Truth, once released, did not require shepherding. That evening, as Fritz prepared dinner, I glanced at the spice rack. The paprika tin sat precisely where it belonged. Everything in order? I asked. Fritz smiled. As it should be. Wolfe regarded the room, the desk, the quiet house. Disorder, he said, is instructive, but only when corrected. I lit a cigarette and nodded. So what's the lesson? Wolfe closed his eyes. That some people believe truth is a tool. It is not. It is a condition. The brown stone settled into silence again, heavier this time, like a library after closing. And somewhere in the city, I suspected, someone was already learning how expensive it was to try to rewrite a book that didn't want to stay dead. The expense, it turned out, wasn't purely academic. It announced itself the next morning in the form of a shattered sense of propriety and a missing object that had no business being missed. I was coming down the stairs when I noticed Wolfe standing in the hall, staring not at me, not at the orchid room door, but at the small table beneath the window where he deposited his hat on the rare occasions it left the house. The table was empty. That's new, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. It is. I followed his gaze. Someone took your hat? My best hat, Wolfe said. The brown felt. Borsalino. I winced. That's not larceny. That's blasphemy. Wolfe did not look amused. It is neither random nor acquisitive. It is declarative. I rubbed my chin. Message received. Question is, from whom? Wolfe turned his head slightly. From someone who believes they were not sufficiently corrected. That narrowed the field to a short list we already had. Celeste Vaughn topped it in bold type, but there were others. Donors embarrassed by exposure, academics whose pet theories had just been neutered, even intermediaries who resented being used and discarded. When truth moves, it tends to step on toes. Any sign of forced entry? I asked. No, Wolfe said. Mr. Panzer confirmed the locks were untouched. The hat was removed with deliberation and ease. So, I said, someone who's been inside before. Yes. And who knew exactly which item would irritate you most without causing actual harm? Wolfe's lips compressed. Indeed. I went to the office phone and dialed Saul. He arrived within the hour, thin as ever, eyes alert, already halfway through the problem before he sat down. Hat's gone, I said. I know, Saul said. I checked the street cameras. No anomalies. But there was a woman parked across the street late last night. Sedan. Didn't leave the car. Description? I asked. Professional, Saul said. Which is to say unmemorable. Wolfe nodded. Ms. Vaughn has not yet accepted the consequences of her behavior? Or, I said, someone wants us to think she hasn't. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. Explain. Hat's symbolic, I said. But it's also reversible. Whoever took it expects it to be noticed and discussed. That's leverage, not spite. Saul smiled thinly. I like the kid. Wolfe ignored him. Then we shall not pursue the hat directly. We will pursue the intention. Which meant waiting, never my favorite tactic, but Wolfe's bread and butter. The phone rang twice that afternoon. Once from a reporter Wolfe refused to speak to, and once from a blocked number that hung up when I answered. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young man holding a box. No uniform, no company logo, just a careful expression and a practiced neutrality. Delivery, he said. For whom? I asked. Nero Wolfe. I took the box and closed the door. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the hat. Untouched, immaculate. Beneath it was a card. No signature, just 4 words. Typed, balance has been restored. I carried it into the office. Wolfe regarded the hat without satisfaction. Has it? He said. Looks like they're calling a draw, I said. On the contrary, Wolfe replied. They are conceding. Saul frowned. You think that's it? Wolfe shook his head. They wished to see whether I would react emotionally. I did not. They returned the object to preserve the illusion of control. Meaning, I said. They don't have it anymore. Meaning, Wolfe corrected. They never did. I blinked. Then who took it? Wolfe allowed himself the faintest smile. Mr. Harrow. I stared. You're kidding. He required confirmation, Wolfe said, that the circle was complete, that all players had revealed themselves. The hat was bait. Saul chuckled softly. That's cold. Yes, Wolfe said. But effective. I sat down and laughed, because sometimes that's the only way to acknowledge a perfectly executed maneuver. So Harrow steals your hat to flush out remaining pressure points. And returns it once they surface, Wolfe said. Balance, indeed. Upstairs, Fritz announced dinner. Wolfe rose. Order, he said, is not the absence of disturbance, it is the ability to absorb it. I picked up the hat and placed it carefully where it belonged. The brownstone approved, and somewhere beyond its walls, I suspected, the last person who thought they could outmaneuver Nero Wolfe was reconsidering the wisdom of trying to borrow balance from a man who owned it outright. If the hat episode had been intended as a curtain call, it missed its cue. Wolfe accepted its return without comment, which in his language amounted to contempt. And that should have been the end of it. But corrections, like I said, leave splinters. They showed up the next afternoon. I was at my desk when the doorbell rang. Not the impatient jab this time, but a careful, almost respectful press. When I opened the door, Daniel Harrow stood there again, minus the satchel and plus a tension he hadn't bothered to hide. "I didn't expect you back so soon," I said. "I didn't expect to be," he replied. "May I come in?" I stepped aside. Wolfe was already watching from the office, his eyes alert now, no trace of postprandial contentment. Harrow stopped a few feet short of the desk, like a man approaching an altar. "You took my hat," Wolfe said. "Yes," Harrow said. He did not apologize. "You returned it?" "Yes." "Explain," Wolfe said. Harrow took a breath. "The annotations will be published. That part is done. But Celeste Varn was not the only one exerting pressure. She was simply the most visible." Wolfe's fingers steepled. "You are suggesting a residual threat?" "Yes. A donor consortium. Quiet. Old money. They fund the Institute indirectly. They prefer certain interpretations of power to remain theoretical." "Ah," Wolfe said. "Ideology. They don't want scandal," Harrow went on. "They want containment. They assumed Ms. Vaughn's failure meant you were finished. When the hat disappeared, they watched. When it returned untouched, they reconsidered." "And you," I said, "wanted to see if they'd move." "Yes," Harrow said. "They did. Not publicly. Privately. Subtly." Wolfe regarded him. "You manipulated my environment to flush out invisible adversaries." "Yes." Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Then, "You are fortunate that the result was satisfactory." Harrow nodded. "I know." "And now?" Wolfe asked. "Now," Harrow said, "they want to meet you." That got my attention. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "They presume audacity." "They presume leverage," Harrow said. "They believe this can be resolved quietly, with funding, influence." "And concessions," I said. "Yes." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "They are mistaken." "I told them you would say that," Harrow said. "They asked me to ask anyway." Wolfe leaned back. "You have asked. You will return and tell them no." "They won't like that." Wolfe shrugged slightly. "I am not concerned with their preferences." Harrow hesitated. "They may attempt to discredit the annotations, question authenticity, create doubt." Wolfe smiled then, a thin, cold expression that never meant anything good for the other side. "They will fail." "How can you be sure?" Harrow asked. "Because doubt requires ambiguity," Wolfe said, "and you have been meticulous." Harrow let out a breath he'd been holding for days. "Then I suppose this is finished." "Almost," Wolfe said. Harrow looked up. "You will publish not only the annotations," Wolfe continued, "but the circumstances of their suppression. Names, methods, motives." Harrow stiffened. "That will cause discomfort," Wolfe said. "Yes, that is the point." Harrow studied Wolfe, then nodded. "Very well." When he left, the house felt different. Not disturbed, not settled, but resolved. Like a chessboard after the final move, pieces still upright but no longer relevant. I lit a cigarette. "You could have taken their meeting," I said. "Milk them." "I do not bargain with cowards," Wolfe said, "nor do I permit the privatization of truth. Even when truth's inconvenient. Especially then." That evening, Fritz served dinner with unusual care. Wolfe ate slowly, thoughtfully. Afterward, as I gathered the empty glasses, I said, "Funny thing, all this over a book." Wolfe closed his eyes. "No, over authority." "Yours?" "No," Wolfe said. "Truths." The brownstone was quiet again, but this time it wasn't forgiveness or tolerance. It was finality, and I had the distinct feeling that somewhere in the city, a group of very rich, very careful people were realizing, too late, that there are some libraries you don't edit, some houses you don't enter, and some men whose patience you should never test unless you're prepared to lose more than a hat. The consequences arrived without fanfare, which was how Wolfe preferred them. No midnight threats, no shadowy emissaries, no dramatic reversals, just a steady unraveling that could only happen once the truth had been allowed to breathe. It started with a phone call from Inspector Kramer 2 days later. I took it in the office while Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids. "They're squirming," Kramer said. "Your donor consortium. Lawyers calling other lawyers. Nobody wants their name printed next to the word suppression." "Music to my ears," I said. "Don't get sentimental," Kramer growled. "They're trying to redirect the mess. Quiet resignations, strategic retirements, and Miss Varn's attorney just requested a plea discussion." "That quick?" "She's pragmatic," Kramer said. "She knows when a board has tipped." After I hung up, Wolfe came down precisely on time, as if he'd been listening through the walls. "Miss Varn will sacrifice herself," Wolfe said, not asking. "Looks that way." "Good," Wolfe said. "She was the most expendable." "And the donors?" "They will retreat," Wolfe said. "Influence despises daylight." That afternoon, the annotations were authenticated by 3 independent experts, 2 of whom had reputations for disagreeing on principle. The commentary was explosive, not for what it advocated, but for how plainly it dismantled the comfortable fiction that power could be wielded cleanly without consequence. Academic journals buzzed. Editorials sharpened their knives. The Institute released a statement that managed to say everything and nothing at once. Harrow sent a note. Short, grateful, final. That evening, the brownstone was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm has passed and taken the humidity with it. Fritz served dinner without interruption. Wolfe ate well. "You know," I said afterward, "for a case without a corpse, this one left a respectable body count." "Reputations," Wolfe said. "They are often terminal." I poured myself a drink and leaned against the desk. "Harrow used you." "Yes." "And you let him." "Yes." "That bother you?" Wolfe considered. "He did not attempt to control the outcome, only to ensure exposure. That distinction matters." "So he passes." "For now," Wolfe said. "Integrity is not permanent. It must be maintained." The phone rang once more before the night was done. Saul Panzer, checking in. "They've stopped watching the house," Saul said. "Whoever was curious isn't anymore." "Good," Wolfe said. "Curiosity without courage is tedious." After the call, Wolfe sat for a while, eyes closed, fingers resting lightly on the arms of his chair. The book lay on the desk. Not De Re Strategia, but a modern paperback Fritz had left there by accident. Wolfe noticed it, frowned, and handed it to me. "Return it to its proper place," he said. "Yes, sir." I stood in the doorway and looked back at him. "Anything else you want to say about all this?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "People believe knowledge grants power. It does not. It grants responsibility. That is why so many prefer ignorance." I nodded. "Cheaper upkeep." Wolfe snorted softly. Later, as I went upstairs, I passed the hall table. The hat sat where it belonged, unremarkable now, just another piece of order restored. The spice rack in the kitchen was perfect. The house held its breath, then let it out. By morning, the city would move on. It always did. New scandals, new revisions of truth, new men convinced they could edit the past without being noticed. But for now, in that narrow slice of time Wolfe carved out by sheer force of intellect and stubborn ethics, the library was whole again, even if it no longer belonged to anyone who wanted to own it. And that, in Nero Wolfe's world, was the closest thing to justice you could reasonably expect. The next morning arrived the way good mornings do, quietly, with no demands attached. Wolfe was already in the dining room when I came down, reading the paper with the faint air of a man confirming his expectations. Fritz hovered nearby, orchestrating breakfast with the solemnity of a minor religious rite. "No headlines," I said, glancing at the front page. "Precisely," Wolfe replied. "Scandal avoided, accountability achieved, an optimal outcome." "You sound almost pleased." "Do not exaggerate," Wolfe said. "I am satisfied." That was as close as he ever came. After breakfast, Wolfe settled into his chair in the office, eyes closed, hands folded, the picture of immobility restored. I sorted mail, most of it uninteresting, a few letters from people who had heard just enough to be dangerous and wanted Wolfe's imprimatur on their causes. I set those aside for the circular file. Near noon, the phone rang. I answered. "Goodwin," Kramer said. His voice was gruffer than usual, which meant he was relieved. "It's done. Varn's plea went through. No jail time, but she's finished. The donors scattered like roaches when the lights came on." "Any blowback?" I asked. "Just the usual academic screaming," Kramer said. "And Wolfe's name getting mentioned with that tone people use when they don't like someone but can't do a damn thing about it." I smiled. "I'll let him know he's admired." "Don't," Kramer said, and hung up. I relayed the essentials to Wolfe. He nodded once. "The matter is concluded," he said. "Until the next person decides truth needs editing," I said. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Then they will be corrected as well." That afternoon, Daniel Harrow sent a final letter, not a note this time, but a full page, carefully worded, formally grateful. He confirmed the annotations were in publication. The Institute had revised its governance protocols, and external oversight would be implemented. It was the kind of letter men write when they've survived something that could have destroyed them. Wolfe read it, then handed it back to me. "File it." "Under what?" I asked. "Resolved," Wolfe said. By early evening, the brownstone had settled into its familiar rhythms. The city outside made its usual noise, distant and irrelevant. Fritz prepared dinner. Wolfe reviewed his orchid schedule. Order, once restored, has a way of asserting itself. As we ate, I said, "You know, most people would have taken the meeting, heard them out, maybe even profited." Wolfe cut his veal with precision. "Most people confuse compromise with intelligence." "And you don't." "No," Wolfe said. "I confuse it with surrender." I chewed on that, figuratively and literally. "You ever worry that makes you inflexible?" Wolfe looked at me. "Inflexibility is only a flaw when one is wrong." After dinner, I poured us each a small drink. Wolfe declined his. Another sign the case had fully concluded. He disliked stimulants when there was nothing left to stimulate. I leaned against the desk. So that's it. No bodies, no blood. Just a lot of reputations rearranged. "Rearranged," Wolfe said, "is a euphemism. They were returned to their proper condition." "Like a book," I said. "Precisely." I glanced around the office, the desk clear, the chairs in place, the air heavy with calm. Funny thing, the brownstone took a beating in this one. Outsiders in and out, pantry violated, hat kidnapped. "And yet," Wolfe said, "it endures." "Because you don't budge." "Because I do not permit disorder to believe it is permanent," Wolfe corrected. The phone remained silent. No more calls, no more inquiries. The city had moved on, as cities do, chasing the next distortion of truth that promised excitement without responsibility. I went upstairs later and paused at the landing, looking down at the hall table. The hat sat there, dull brown, ordinary again, stripped of its symbolic weight. That was as it should be. Symbols, like truth, work best when they don't announce themselves. As I turned in for the night, it occurred to me that Wolfe hadn't once raised his voice, left his chair, or touched the evidence with his own hands. He never needed to. He had simply refused to allow falsehood to settle comfortably in his house, or in his head. That, I figured, was the real lesson of the library that wouldn't stay dead. Truth doesn't need protection, it needs refusal. Morning came softly, as if the brownstone itself had decided not to disturb a thing that had finally settled into place. Wolfe was already awake when I came down, seated in his chair with his eyes closed, breathing evenly, the paper folded untouched on the desk. It wasn't sleep. It was contemplation, the kind that comes after a problem has been solved and before it's been dismissed. I didn't say anything. You don't interrupt a man enjoying the aftertaste of intellectual victory. Fritz moved through the room with quiet assurance, setting down coffee. Wolfe opened his eyes and nodded once in acknowledgement. Order had resumed its proper hierarchy. "Well," I said eventually, "looks like the world survived." "An unfortunate habit," Wolfe replied, "but a persistent one." I sat at my desk and leafed through the morning paper. A small article on page 6 mentioned the Institute's announcement. The annotations authenticated, published in full. Governance reforms enacted, unnamed donors withdrawing support for personal reasons. No names, no drama, just consequences, neatly applied. "They didn't print the worst of it," I said. "No," Wolfe agreed. "They never do. Public truth is always abridged." "And private truth?" Wolfe considered. "That is more durable." The phone rang once, briefly. Saul Panzer. No developments, no loose ends. He'd checked. He always did. When the line went dead, Wolfe leaned back and folded his hands. "The matter is concluded?" "Completely," I asked. "Yes." I waited. Wolfe never used that word lightly. "You're satisfied," I said. "I am," Wolfe replied, "because the attempt was not merely exposed, it was rendered futile. The annotations are public. Their suppression is documented. Any future effort to revise them will carry the odor of cowardice." I smiled. "That's about as close as you get to mercy." "Mercy," Wolfe said, "is irrelevant. Accuracy is sufficient." I glanced toward the hall table, where the hat sat exactly where it belonged. No longer a symbol, just a hat again. The spice rack in the kitchen was pristine. The office was inviolate. The brownstone had been tested and had responded in the only way it knew how, by refusing to change for anyone who didn't belong. "You know," I said, "for a case that never went near a morgue, this one felt heavier than most." "Yes," Wolfe said, "because it concerned intent rather than outcome. Violence is crude. Manipulation requires intellect, and therefore invites judgment. And you judged." "Corrected," Wolfe said. "Judgment implies emotion." I laughed. "You corrected half the city without leaving your chair." "That," Wolfe said, "is the advantage of thinking before acting." Fritz announced lunch. Wolfe rose with care, his movements unhurried, the crisis already receding into memory where it belonged. As he passed the desk, he paused and touched the corner of the book Harrow's letter had been clipped to. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "remember this." "Which part?" I asked. "That truth does not require defense," Wolfe said. "Only exposure. It is falsehood that must be protected, disguised, hidden, like contraband. And when it's brought into your house?" Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. "Then it must endure my hospitality." We ate well. Fritz outdid himself, as he always did when the house had survived an indignity. Conversation was sparse, comfortable. Afterward, Wolfe returned to his chair, the day already complete in his mind. I stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the street. People passed, busy with their own revisions of reality. Somewhere, someone was undoubtedly planning the next clever way to edit the past for profit or pride. I almost felt sorry for them. "You thinking again?" Wolfe asked without opening his eyes. "Just admiring the peace," I said. "It never lasts." "No," Wolfe said, "but it can be restored." I took my hat from the rack, adjusted it, and headed for the door. "Same time tomorrow?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Disorder is punctual." I paused, hand on the knob, and looked back once more. Nero Wolfe sat immovable in his chair, guardian of logic, appetite intact, house reclaimed. The library, real and metaphorical, was whole again. Outside, the city made noise. Inside, the brownstone held its silence. And somewhere between the two, truth remained exactly where it belonged, unowned, inconvenient, and very much alive.